All right, thank you panelists for coming, and I will give you a chance to just answer fairly free form, but we have focus students who are English language learners or have an IEP of 504 or are in the Gifted Talent program or have some kind of life experience that impacts their learning. How do you spot them? What characteristics do they carry into the classroom? Obviously, every student is an individual, unique, but they're often common characteristics. So what are some of the characteristics that you deal with when you have these kinds of students in your class? Unmute yourself and go ahead and answer.
Usually you give instructions to a class, the vast majority of students start working on the task. The student that has disability, they would just start looking around and not work. So that's one way you can tell, even without looking at the student profile. They usually take longer to finish quizzes or tests that the vast majority of the class took maybe 10 minutes. That person is going to take longer when you look at the paper, pretty much in blank. So those are little things you can note, even without looking. Synergies, the system that we use, I can tell like when I'm in person right away, but online is mostly they are disoriented. They ask you in private, what are we doing right now, even though you went over the steps multiple times. So
I agree with what Diana said. And I think to build on that, a lot of times what you'll see maybe is some defiance, some behavior or activities that feel like defiance. But if you take a second and sort of unravel them, you will notice that it's something else behind it. It's that culture of feeling unsuccessful or being angry and wanting to quit before you try. Maybe being overwhelmed, anxiety is a huge 504 right now, huge. So maybe they're anxious and they don't know how to ask for the help they need, so they throw up a wall instead. So often things that seem like a behavior issue are actually an indication just that they need a little more from you.
Would you say that at times, sorry, Nicole, would you,
go ahead.
Would you say that at times what appears to be defiance might be better termed resistance or defense?
I think defense, self-defense is an excellent word, yes.
Yeah, I completely agree. I teach in a pretty upper middle class to upper class area. So my experience is definitely not the experience of a lot of teachers. And I also teach French. So they're a pretty self-selecting group. So I end up with a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, and a lot of ADD. Those are the big ones that I usually deal with. And I would say I see a lot of having a hard time starting tasks. And my kids aren't generally, the defiance thing is not something that I see quite as often. It's not that I don't, but not quite as often, but often just, staring off into space or sitting there with the pen and not doing anything. And that goes for easy things or things that I would consider easy, like, here's two options, pick one. So if a student is struggling with like, I am giving you choices and they have a hard time picking one of the given choices, that's a pretty big indicator right away that something is wrong. Yeah, but to definitely agree what Arian and Diana both said as well.
So we're talking right now about kids that have IEPs or have 504s, I think, right? How to identify them. Sometimes I can't tell. I mean, like everybody just mentioned really good things. And then sometimes you really can't tell early on, and you really need to look at those rosters so that you, on the first day of school, something kind of off happens, but you can't place it. Like you'll go, oh, that's what's happening. So it's just really good that those codes are there for you so you don't get frustrated with something that seems it should be obvious, and this kid is having issues. But maybe it's not obvious that they're autistic, or so maybe you need help identifying that. That's why those reports are just great to just flip through and read really quick before. I know you get overwhelmed at the beginning of the year, but when you get those reports in, just you don't have to read the whole thing. Just glean a little bit of info. So when you start, and some kids, you'll get their report and you won't have a problem with them all year. So it's just good to look at.
Okay,
I would like to add something to that. I don't always know before school starts which kids have a 504 or an IEP. In fact, sometimes I find out a month into school, which I'm not supposed to. I am supposed to know from the beginning of the year. But if they're in the process of being identified, sometimes we don't know. So even though you have that list, and if you have the list, absolutely read it. Don't wait. You definitely need to know from the beginning. Yeah, same Diana. She's typing in the chat. You don't always know. And so if a kid is off, you treat them like they have a 504, is I think kind of the point that Diana's making that I 100% agree with.
we've sort of picked up some of the other questions that I had, so let's go off on just a little bit of a side note for a moment. You mentioned a list that you get. So does the administration provide you with a list of students with various needs at the beginning of the year? And what are the kinds of things that will typically be on that list?
Well, I can speak to that. It sort of depends, to be honest with you, and it has evolved. This is my 20th year teaching, and it has definitely evolved in the time that I've been teaching. So often at the beginning of the year, we are supposed to get an email from the case carrier, the person who is providing the extra support, someone in the special ed department who is an advisor for that student. And that goes for any student who has an IEP or a 504 in our district. We should get both. We also get mandatory notifications of behavior issues that are not on 504s, but that might be considered, they were suspendable maybe offenses that the student had, or repeat offenses that the student had, especially if it's something like with weapons where they want to try to give you a little heads up about that, which is always nice. And then if there is something extreme, I've only had this once in 20 years, you guys, so don't panic, okay? They will actually pull those teachers aside, and we had a briefing with administration, the school resource officer, the police officer for our school, and the students' teachers, so that we were aware of what had happened and just sort of what to watch out for and what to avoid. And I will state with that ended up being one of my absolute favorite students ever. So don't let that color your opinion before you see that kid.
Okay, we've talked primarily about those with IEP and 504, and they tend to be the ones who get a lot of the focus, and rightly so. But what about your gifted, talented students?
I'd like to start with sometimes those are the same kid. I would say pretty often those are the same kid. The number of kids I have who are GATE and also have a 504 for ADD, it's a Venn diagram, but it's almost a circle. So I think that obviously you have to make it work for everyone, but the idea that those are two different groups of kids is mostly fake. You have to, give a range for all kinds of things for all assignments, right? Like there are smart kids who weren't identified as GATE for various reasons, maybe because they were learning English when that identification was happening. That happens a lot. And I have kids who are English language learners and also GATE and also have ADD. I have, I think, 5 this year who fall under all 3 of those categories. And I love them all dearly. But so those aren't different groups.
As far as English language learners, often when they get to French or Spanish or German or whatever foreign language you're teaching or world language, they're they're pretty high up there on the English learner scale because they have to be able to take that elective. So, oh, maybe it depends on your school.
Yeah.
Okay, then I'll let the other people talk to that. So what I find at my school, because they're pretty strict with that selection process, is they're fast learners. They learn German fast because they're already bilingual.
Okay, those of you who reacted.
Diana, you want to take that one?
It's sort of a known secret that they put the English learners in my class, in my other school, because they're like, she's going to be able to provide support, not just instructional, but also emotional support. So they send them to my class. They send those kids to our class, at least to my class they used to. Some of them are Spanish speakers. Some of them speak other indigenous language from Central America, and then Spanish. The entire school assumes that Spanish is their first language, and most of the time it's not. I had students that just arrived from China, and they are taking my French class, so they're learning English and French at the same time. I provide the same support that I provide for my students with IEPs or 504 to those students as well. You can all benefit from scaffolded instruction.
So I have some interesting maybe insights on this. One, Jennifer, I am jealous that you have kids that have high levels. I teach at a school that has most of our students are English language learners of some sort. Some of them have been tested out of the program, so they've been redesignated as fluent English proficient. But I have a good number of students who are still in the system, I guess you would say, in the different tiers. And so like this year, I have everything from like what Diana just said. I have a student who just arrived who speaks German and Thai. We have no common language. We're trying French. And then I have another student who is a level 1 ELD. And I have a significant number of students who are long-term EL students. What happens with the long-term EL students is that they can fake out a lot. And because of that, you make an assumption that their level, their English level is different. And then it can sometimes skew your idea of what they should be able to do. But a long-term student means that they've never pushed themselves really. And I will tell you guys that typically the lower the level, the more smiley and naughty the student. And they will just the whole way through your lesson and you're like, yes, they're getting it. I'm doing such a good job. And then you figure out they had no idea what you were talking about because what you drew as a sun doesn't represent a sun in their culture. And you're like, well, there's that.
Okay, we've had a couple of comments in the chat. Anyone want to follow up with anything? Otherwise, I will go ahead and ask a couple of the questions that came up. One was, are your ELs allowed to take any elective they want? Are there restrictions? How does that work for them? And another question, because I know how schools have it work, is there room in their schedule for them to take something extra?
I think the problem at my
Jennifer's.
school is there's no room in their schedule. They have to take like 2 English classes.
My school is a lot like Jennifer's, it sounds like. They have to be at a certain level of certain proficiency in English before they can take French, unless they are a native French speaker. And it works the same way with the Spanish program. So if they're a native Spanish speaker, or we assume that they're a native Spanish speaker, like Diana said, then they go into the native Spanish speakers program. But otherwise, they can't take a foreign language until they are out of the EL program. I do want to say something about the fluent English proficient, which is kind of like the stepping stone between EL and like redesignated. I've given the LPAC. I think we're still calling it the LPAC. That's the test that they give them to see how well they're doing with English. The test is what a native speaker would consider to be fairly simple. And the tasks that they have to do to pass out to be considered redesignated rely a lot on their academics, but their English doesn't have to be what you would consider strong. So even when you get kids who are fluent English proficient or even sometimes redesignated, that doesn't mean that their English is perfect and that they understand everything. A lot of times they have a really big gap and they miss things that get done in English because really their English is not strong. It's just sufficient enough that we don't have to give them services is basically what it is. So I think that's really important to consider, like, especially for French, there's a lot of shared vocabulary between English and French, but a lot of that vocabulary is really high level vocabulary in French. So a good example was we're doing coupable, which is culpable. So that's great. Those words are very similar, but unless they speak a Romance language, they don't know what culpable means. And so stuff like that will completely go over their head, and you need to realize that, like, being sufficient does not in any way really mean strong, and it doesn't mean that they don't need a lot of support, linguistic or otherwise.
But that's where CI is your best friend, because every single thing that we do in a comprehension focused classroom provides those scaffolds. Every single thing just naturally does it. And because of that, I think that's why you see things like you see kids being put into our classes when maybe they shouldn't be, because they are successful, because they can learn, simply because CI lends itself to here's imagery, here's repetition, here are word walls for support. We're doing everything based on context. We are making sure that it's not just comprehensible, but Robert, comprehended. It goes in the brain. It doesn't just sit above it. So because of all those things that we do, you guys, these students, these 504 kids, these kids who have IEPs, children with learning disabilities, they naturally get the repetition that they need, the support that they need, because we give it. And they don't have stigma in our classes. They are successful. Often in an IEP meeting, and other teachers let me know how you feel, I am the only teacher who speaks positively about the child and their performance in the class. And I think it's just because of what we do, lending itself to helping these kids.
Arian, you touched on meeting with parents and other teachers and administrators in those IEP and 504 meetings. Would you elaborate on that just a little bit about how your reports tend to differ from other teachers?
Absolutely. And then other teachers, feel free to step in on this one too. So typically, like, what they ask is like interaction with peers, interaction in the class, questions like what's their focus like. And while there will still be areas that the student struggles, because naturally if you have something else going on, you are going to struggle, you will end up that in a CI classroom, you tend to have more positive experiences with your kids. If someone's a little quirky, that sometimes works. So you'll go into a meeting and you might have a kid that has a C minus, but that's the highest grade they have by 20%. And you're talking about how funny they are and what a good job they do during calendar talk of engaging with the class and remembering details about something you said the day before when you were doing your one-word image, and they brought it back to remind you when you were writing the class story the next day. And all these things that are little things that get overlooked in a traditional classroom, all of a sudden they can be highlighted again and they can be shown as a strength, as opposed to always seeing a student from a deficit view. We are able to look at them from a place of strength and positivity.
Anyone else want to say something about that?
Erin said it so well.
She did. And many of your students will tell you at some point that yours is their favorite class, and part of it is because your class is the only class they hear anything positive about themselves. So Yeah, that's great. I want to go back a little bit and pick up some other things. In addition to getting a list of the students with various sorts of things, and you should be getting, I believe, students with physical issues on there as well. I know I used to get things like students who had certain allergies and students who had certain medical conditions, some, hard of hearing, various other kinds of things. So how does knowing that have an impact on how you address them and how you differentiate?
This might seem simple, but when I buy candies for my kids, just make sure that there's no nuts for the ones that have, like, buy a variety, because then you feel like, oh, I want to, but I can't because I have an allergy. That already makes that kid feel like unwelcome. So I always make sure like to buy the chocolate with no nuts for those kids. And then just be aware of the asthma situation. I had a child had an asthma attack in my classroom. We were doing a story. He was acting out the story. He had and I'm like, oh my gosh, he's not acting. And then he had his inhaler in the backpack, and then one of the kids grabbed it, and that was quite scary. So it's good to have that list there. It's good to have that list available. They give it to you almost at the beginning. Sometimes they lag, but if you can go online, most of the times you can check. It will tell you.
And I think that what Diana just said and what Robert brought up, you guys, it's really important. There are a lot of invisible disabilities. So I'm a type 1 diabetic, which means that if I don't monitor my blood sugar really, really well, I can have severe highs or severe lows. If you don't understand that, like, your student has that, like, you might see their lethargy as just them being tired or something. Whereas, like, for me, lethargy means something's going really wrong and I'm maybe one step away from passing out. So it's really important just to have that awareness. It's the same thing. Some kids have like a visual challenge and they don't seem like they do, but then you can give them preferential seating. So again, a lot of times I just feel like we keep saying this, but behaviors that you think are strange or odd or lacking in some way, or, like Diana's saying, someone's acting and you're like, wait a second, is he being dramatic or is he having an asthma attack? Those are huge cues for you to double check, just to be like, wait a second here, something isn't right, because a lot of what we're talking about right now is not visible to the eye. So you have to be very aware. And again, in CI, what do? We build relationships. We build relationships with our kids. We get to know them. They trust us. They tell us things. And things come up through the way we teach that allows us to know them better. And then we're able to better serve them.
Okay, we had a question about students who have migraines, which is another invisible disability. How do you help them?
I can answer that one. I had a couple of kids, lighting. I had a couple kids who had pretty severe migraines and so I just kept the lights off. My classroom had enough natural light and I just always had the lights off. I think that we're having a lot of kids right now who are really, really struggling because they have to look at a screen and that is pretty miserable. And so currently the deal is you can keep your camera off if you need to. You can turn your computer around as long as you're showing me evidence of engagement in other ways. I don't necessarily need to see your face, even though that is 100% my district's policy is that they need to have cameras on. I don't care as long as they are showing engagement is basically my rule. And then Diana said colorblind. So before we talk about colors, I show those. I don't know if you've ever taken a colorblind test where it has like the dots with the numbers inside. And so we play a little game like, oh, can you read the number? And every year I find out that one of my kids is colorblind and they didn't know it. Some of them do know in advance, but that's something to know that if you're doing something that requires them to identify the red or the blue, you need to be aware if they can't see red. And those things don't generally come in any sort of packet or like notification. You have to do that, like Arian was saying, by building relationships and having them be able to trust you to to tell you that kind of information instead of, you know, hiding it or being embarrassed or not wanting to say something.
Does that affect what you do when you're writing on the whiteboard?
Yes. Colors, you like, it's always good to color code, but for the color coding, you have to make sure all the kids can tell the difference between those two. You preferably want to write them in a way that is like clear, right? So you like write the one thing here and then you indent the definition in English or something like that. So there's also a visual cue to it. But people definitely underestimate how important it is to write big on the board. I have lots of kids who will not wear their glasses. They don't wear contacts. They'll tell you they are not. And they just can't see and they won't tell you, especially the freshmen. My juniors are like, Madam, I can't see the board. And I said, move up. But the freshmen just won't tell you. They will keep that to themselves until you have built up enough of a relationship that they're like willing to admit that, as if it's like some fault that they can't see. I don't really understand because I don't wear glasses. Arian, would you like to chime in?
Honestly, I can't understand not wearing them, you guys, because I wouldn't be able to see. So, but for me, I'm dyslexic. So I had some weird challenges growing up because, not to toot my own horn or anything, but I'm rather bright and I'm dyslexic. So I'm an odd combination of things. And so I kind of just got over like them thinking, like my teachers thinking that I was one way or another. I also come from a really high achieving family and I'm the fifth of 5. So it was this expectation that I was going to perform a certain way. And then I come and I have reading problems. So it was definitely like wearing my glasses wasn't ever even an issue for me because I was like, anything I can do to make this easier. And randomly enough, again, you guys, one of the reasons why I loved French was because if the letters got mixed up in French, I didn't feel stupid because I was learning along with everybody else. Whereas I felt less smart in my regular classes where we would be asked to read aloud and I couldn't. So it's just another thing, another place where maybe our kids with a disability can shine and they can show again how amazing they are in a different way.
When we were talking about color blindness, Diana put a comment in the chat that I think really needs to be highlighted, and that is you can do things like underline and circle. You can do things that do not depend on a color to do your differentiation and help your students spot things. So that's something to think about when you're thinking about how to differentiate and how to accommodate and scaffold. Okay. What kind of support? Oh wait, we had another comment in the chat. What about how do you adjust if the workload is a challenge for them to complete in a specific time frame?
I'm actually interested to hear maybe like from Jennifer Nicole on this one, because I know what the rules are at my school, but I'm intrigued to hear about like maybe somewhere that has less kids who fall into some of these more obvious categories.
I don't do a lot of, I do a lot of CI, I do a lot of conversation. I don't do a lot of making them output. I give them input. And so I never have this problem, but I don't give them much work to do. So I can't, it's a lot of work for the teacher because you're always on, but then I don't lose anybody. So it's worth it to me. And then I always think, gosh, maybe I should make them work harder. And then I think about, wait, you're making them work hard. They're listening to you speak German the whole time. That's work. That's work. And then
let me just interject here. Rigor,
oh, yeah.
Sustained focus. And you're making them sustain that focus on you in German for the whole class period. That is a rigorous class.
There you go. And I'm not giving them some like worksheet to translate because the kids that we're talking about with the 504s and the IEPs, they get behind, they get frustrated, and it's not really necessary.
If you want to know how much mental work it takes, just take a class in a different language that you don't know, like Mandarin or Arabic or something like that. For me, I did Mandarin this summer, and I was exhausted at the end of it because I had to think all this, the sounds, and then look at the pinyin, and I mean, it was a lot of mental work. Then try to do the gesture when the lady was like, wait, what was that word? I don't remember. I think that was that word. Do the gesture now in a timely manner. So you're not falling behind, and the teacher doesn't think you're just copying the gestures from other people. It's a lot of work. So we are giving them work, not just busy work.
Nicole, you had started to say something.
Yeah, I changed my mind. I'm just going to follow up with Diana. Okay, so back to the original. If they have a migraine, you just give them more time.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I try not to give any of my classes work that needs to be completed in order to get something out of the next class. Because if you're relying on them doing the homework, you are going to be very disappointed. You will never have 100% of the kids do the homework, so don't bother. But what that means is that they can always get more time. They can turn it in a day late because they had a migraine, or 2 days late because they had 5 other classes they also missed. They can turn it in next week for all I really care. But to what Diana was saying about it being heavy mental work, also keep in mind that it's heavy mental work, and you will get kids who will check out because they are not used to doing that sustained work. And maybe they're not used to it because it's the beginning of the year and they had all summer off, or since March. But also maybe, it's part of their 504 that they really cannot sustain that amount of focus for that amount of time. And maybe they just aren't used to being made to do that. So Diana is saying brilliant things in the chat, of course. But I think it's important to realize that, if they're a little slow, they are working with you, but also with that amount of load, some kids will check out. I mean, you really have to be attentive to which kids you have kind of lost a little. You gotta, be like, time for a new activity, if you're getting too many of them.
What Nicole just said made me think of something interesting to you guys. Often the kids that you think of as your traditional quote unquote good students, they might struggle as much in your class without an IEP, without a 504, without life experiences, because exactly what Jennifer just talked about too, we're giving them something so different than what they're used to. They're used to the class with worksheets. They're used to the class where there's one answer and you show them how to get it, and then they repeat back to you, and you give them points. And it is hard for them to make the mental shift, as hard as it is for you as an educator to embrace this way of teaching. It is as hard for them to embrace this way of learning. And it does take a lot of, again, that patience, that giving that extra time. Exactly what Nicole just said. They will struggle. So I like what Jennifer said. You have to remind them sometimes that they are working hard. And every now and then you got to throw them a little bone, be like, here's an exit ticket. Y'all do this and show me what you learned today, because it helps them feel successful. So I think that's maybe sometimes where some of our gate kids come in, is they might struggle simply because they're not used to the expectations of the mental workload versus the busy work, visual on the desk workload.
So let's follow up on that. How does teaching with comprehensible input or comprehension-based communicative language teaching, how does that help you to differentiate for your students?
See, I was like differentiation 101 when I discover it. We do gestures with our students so they can remember the words. We read with them. We do choral readings with them. We do show them images. So they see the same vocabulary in different ways. Also, we do a lot of brain breaks. A lot of physical activities. Every 20 minutes, we kind of change 15 to 20 minutes, we kind of change our activities. Okay, we're doing running dictation now. We're doing TPR right now. We're reading and organizing a story in chronological order. Think like CI just lends itself for differentiating classes for our students.
Jennifer, I think you unmuted yourself. You were going to say something?
Oh my gosh, what was your original question, Robert?
How teaching with CI helps you to differentiate for your various students.
Okay, so it's all the things Diana said, plus you're talking about them.
Personalization.
Yeah, because all you're doing is using the language, so you could talk about anything you want. So why not talk about the kids? They're sure interested in each other. So that personalization right there is differentiation as well, because they're interested. If someone says that they use a certain app on their phone and they use that app too, oh, I want to know how to say, like, I listen to oh gosh, or I watch YouTube. I'm sorry, I couldn't think of an app with music. They want to say, oh, I know I watch YouTube too, or I watch Netflix too, and they want to know about other people in class because they're interested about everybody in class, and that really helps because they're interested in that topic. And who doesn't want to? That's why they take your classes. They want to be able to make conversation. So making conversation with them like that, it's great. It shows that you care about them, because they walk into your class and it's not like physics class where I'm going to present a bunch of information. I'm going to ask about you, and I care about you and what you like to do. So it also breaks down some barriers of kids that have problems with authority, that might be problems in other classes. Um, it really, like how some people said, like, they don't like any other classes except for your class. So how does it, ask the question again, Robert? I don't know where I'm having trouble.
You're doing just fine because you're talking about how CI helps you to differentiate.
Okay. And then it helps you too, because CI is asking a bunch of questions, right? So you ask the harder question to kids that you know are gate, and you ask the easiest question to a kid you know is struggling, to make him feel like top of the world. So that's the other way to differentiate with CI.
So this is my bell work, and it was just this is all information that I received from a student. I interviewed her, and the next day I typed all the sentences that I remember from her. And then you should have looked at her face when she saw, like, oh my goodness, she's writing about me. And I used here, in case some kids forgot, we repeated those words a lot. But I'm like, they probably forgot there were new words like cacahuates. That's her favorite word in Spanish because it has the word caca in it. So I put the books, all this, so to help those kids that will probably will forgotten those words. So you just put a little bit of extra help. I also made a different color, but then again, we know some kids are colorblind, so I included the pictures as well. So that hopefully that would help.
Okay, anyone else want to add anything?
I think we've talked a lot about what we personally as teachers do, but I think that part of CI is also giving them a lot of outlets for showing how they understand. It's not just about write me an essay and that's how you're going to show me you understand, right? They can show us comprehension in a multitude of ways. And I think that's an important part of it in terms of like physical, like ability. But also, some kids really love the TPR. They just want to show me the gesture. They're ready, but they are not ready to talk. And I have hyperverbal kids who just want to say it. They think that doing the gesture is dumb because they're cool. But they are willing to talk, and that's fine. And so having the myriad of ways that they can show comprehension, I think, is another important thing to think about as well.
And how does distance learning change the dynamic?
I saw that question from Erica. That's a good question. I have to remind them that they can chat with me privately if they're too embarrassed to say that they don't understand. So that helps. That private chat helps. It's interesting. There's been some things that have been better. And I think that I'm going to miss that chat in the classroom, because they're not afraid to ask you in a private chat. They, but yeah, sometimes you do feel like you're talking. It's like, hello, is this mic on? And I remind them, like, give me thumbs up, give me thumbs down, like thumbs up if you agree, thumbs down if you disagree, nod, like, let me know you're there. I need that feedback. And one big thing I've done that's been very helpful is I have when they're responding to the group questions, I tell them, okay, I need to see your lips moving. I don't make them all unmute because it's like chaos, but the kids that are outgoing can unmute. But I said, what I need for you to do is, if you can't answer my question, if your lips aren't moving and you can't answer my question, I need this. I need you to tell me that I don't know. And then I see that and I slow down. And then when they do this, I praise them like they're the smartest kid in the world and that I needed them so much. And then I'll get more of this to slow me down, because that's the hard part, is not speeding up too much, because you're not getting the same feedback you get in a live classroom.
Can I second that? Because that is so hard. You think everyone must be understanding. There's lots of nodding. And then I get excited because, like, if I'm doing something like what Diana's doing and I'm talking about one of them, then I get even more excited and I speak faster. So I think that is such a good point, Jennifer. And by the way, we're all stealing your gesture. I don't know if you saw that, but that will be starting tomorrow in many a classroom right here. I think to you guys with the digital, it's really important to just, one of the things that I've had to learn is that sometimes kids aren't responding because you're lagging for them. They literally have no idea what you said. So I have learned to talk and type. I have learned to put my questions into chat so they can see them as well as hearing them. You just have had to flex with what it looks like or feels like to get responses from kids. It's just been very, I think it's really, for me personally, it's really challenged me on how can they prove, or how can they show that they're understanding? How can they show that they're listening and engaged? And everything Diana's saying, like using reaction buttons, like Jennifer said, having them actually physically do things like this, using the chat, using the private chat. I don't know if you guys have ever used Pear Deck, but I can use Pear Deck with my kids, and then it gives me reports on, we have the premium version at our school, but it gives me reports on who did what. Nearpod, you can use, we did a Kahoot today. I can see what kids answered and how many questions they answered. And you guys, you're like, love the little moments. Like, I have this little boy who today started smack talking me in the chat because he was going to pass me because I played the Kahoot with them. It was the cutest thing I've ever seen in my life. Was Mateo doing better than I was? At that moment, absolutely. So I just slowed down my answers and I let that boy win. He didn't win. He came in like 11th, but he beat me. And that was what he needed. And it was such a beautiful moment. And I think that's been something cool, is learning that you can still have those amazing connections through a screen with these kids we've never met before.
And I would like to point out that what Arian did with that student is a kind of differentiation.
So I had this week, actually, it happened. A student that never turns his camera on, but he participates, and sometimes he turns it on, but most of the times he's off. I was assuming he was playing video game like a lot of them are. But yesterday, a cute little baby showed up. His little baby brother, I guess, turned on the camera, and he was like right there in front of the computer. And I'm like, oh, how adorable. Is that your brother? And I started asking him questions in Spanish. And how old is he? 2. He's taking care of a 2-year-old baby brother while still trying to take my Spanish class. And I'm like, okay, that's why his camera is off most of the time. It's not that he probably is not paying attention because he has to take care of a 2-year-old baby brother. I understand that he shouldn't be doing that, but that's the circumstances in the family, and we need to be aware of that. And we need to just you know, he's participating as much as he can. I'm assuming when the little baby brother is sleeping, he's there. That's probably the days that he's participating a lot. And when he's not, it's because he probably has to feed or change his little baby brother.
And that segues very nicely into talking about students with life experience, because there is one. So how do you deal with those kinds of situations?
I think the hardest thing is just getting them to tell you what that thing is. Straight up, right? Like, unless that the brother had turned on the camera, the kid probably wouldn't have told Diana.
Nope.
He would have happily gone for this entire experience online and not said a word. And I find that that is absolutely the most common reaction, is to keep it to themselves. And sometimes it's feelings of embarrassment. Sometimes it's the family heavily does not want them to share that information, especially with teachers. So there's a lot of family pressure to keep stuff like that, you know, under wraps. But man, my kids are having a rough time this year. A lot of deaths of grandparents for mysterious and not mysterious reasons. Stroke in March, had a minor stroke a month ago, fell and smashed his face on a fireplace a week and a half ago and was in the ICU. She did not tell any of her other teachers. She told me because we have the kind of relationship that you can build with CI. But I told her English teacher. I told her English teacher because he didn't know, because she's not sharing it. And that's absolutely the most common. So like that relationship building, I'm speaking a lot of English to build those relationships online.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth it. You know, it's not 90%, but having the kids who are willing to say, I'm taking care of my little brother. I had a kid who was bottle feeding their sibling online, so young enough to be bottle fed. That's worth knowing. English, that exchange is worth it for me.
And then that kid, by the way, he left his camera on the entire time because I accepted little baby brother. His name is Corey, by the way. And I asked him question. And tomorrow I'm going to ask, hey, how's Corey doing today? What is he eating today? What does Corey like to eat? I'm going to just make sure he understands, like, I'm cool with that. You know, bring him in front of the camera as many times as you want to, if that's what it takes.
Okay, we have about 8 minutes left before time for us to leave, and I want to be aware of your time limits. So one of the things that we deal with now that's a big thing is culturally relevant, culturally responsive teaching, dealing with students who come to us from what are in the United States minority cultures, from other cultures. And obviously when you're dealing with English learners, you're dealing with students from another culture, but how do you take into account the cultures and subcultures and help students see those as positives and strengths in their lives and not just something to be ashamed of?
I do something really simple, but I know Diana does something similar as well, where we talk about like why each day is special. And sometimes it's National Cheeseburger Day. And sometimes it's that, you know, it's a special celebration in a certain culture and you know that you have students from that culture, or it's an Independence Day of a country that you know you have students from, and so you celebrate those things. It's the, you know, why is today important? It's important because of this. And then I think it helps them feel engaged, and you can see their little heads come up on screen, sort of like Diana's saying again about that student, like all of a sudden you're talking about their thing, you're talking about their celebration, and you're making it good and normal. And I think that that is such a simple way, even if you're uncomfortable with some of the more bold strokes you can take to make your teaching much more culturally relevant, you can do little things like that easily.
And I know that many of you use what we call calendar talk to start off as part of your opening routine. Is that when you include those things?
And I would
Sometimes I
say,
do a special lesson on it too. Sorry, like I'll just add it in. I'm like, this is big enough, let's learn.
and yeah, calendar talks and weekend talk is really good for that. That stuff will just come up like something they celebrated from their culture on the weekend, or when you like kind of have questions of the day, like what's your favorite food? Foods will come up from the different cultures, and when we hear any kind of information, whether it's cultural or any kind of information, we have our kids trained to be interested, to be positive. So it just all fits in.
We really get into a more, so one of the AP tasks is talking about identity, and the various ways that that is can be expressed. So with my level threes, when they have a little bit more language to do that kind of discussion, I let them really kind of get into that discussion, and we do debates and stuff like that. And they have to be carefully moderated, right? Because there are some students who say things that are inflammatory because they don't know better, but there's also students who will say things that are inflammatory because they do know better. But I think that giving them that space to express their opinion in a foreign language is a really empowering moment, because suddenly this language is really a tool for something they really want to communicate. And I think you have to know your kids for that kind of discussion. I think you have to really know where your kids are coming from and be aware of which kids you have to watch out for those discussions. But man, you learn so much about them. You learn so much.
Another thing that I like to do, my class started, how are you feeling today? And finally, as of last week, they started to tell me why. Like, oh, why I am nervous? I'm like, oh, I have a test. I'm like, okay, did you study? No. We're starting to have conversations. And usually when I'm in person with them, that starts like maybe week 3, they're sharing already. This is my week 7. And finally they started telling me, a few of them, not all of them, a few of them are telling me why. Oh, I'm tired because of this. I feel sick, this and that. I'm worried. Why are you worried? And start telling me. But it took me 3 weeks more than it normally would have taken me if I was seeing them in person every day too. So this helps like really build relationship. I have a student that wrote me a letter saying that her favorite part of my class were her little therapy session. That's what they call this, therapy. This is therapy. It's hilarious.
Diana, I do something like that too with happy and sad, but you have 6 emotions. Would you mind sharing what they are?
Yeah, actually, I start with 2 and then I add 3. And right now we're like around 5. And at the end of the year, they have a lot of the emotions. But I start with 2, I think, and then I add 1 more, and then I add 1 more. Right now we're
I
at a
see.
5, I think. But I will send you the slides
Oh, nice.
if I get your email.
Okay, I'll put it in the chat.
Okay. We are at our time, and so I would like to just ask each of you if you have any final word of wisdom for the students and the student teachers who are listening in on this. Just any final words that you would like to say. I'd like to just give you that opportunity. Give you a moment to think.
There's no such thing as having the perfect student. They're all different. They all need different help. They all need different differentiation. They all need to build a different relationship with you. And the more you think of each kid as an individual that you have to build a relationship with, I think the farther you'll get. Arian said in the chat that the pace online is glacial. But that includes the relationship building. That's been really hard for me, is having kind of the breaks on that, because I feel like I don't know them all, which hurts my feelings. I don't like it.
I would say yes, look at the IEP and all that information, but do not let that like make up your mind about the student, because sometimes you learn that yes, they do have a disability, but sometimes those are the most brilliant students, the ones that enjoy your classes the most, the ones that try the hardest. So yes, be aware and look at the document because it's a legal document, but also do not let that determine your entire mindset or thought about that person.
Well, and usually those kids, I usually like those kids with the IEPs and the 504s, you know, the ones that are tricky, the ones that have never been identified and should have a 504 or an IEP. Those ones are tricky. But once you get used to seeing the signs, and then like how they said, just treat everyone as if they might have one and just scaffold for everybody, and then that'll help you. There's something that I wish someone told me when I first started teaching. When I had to have a conversation with a student that was misbehaving, I never knew how to have the conversation. I lectured them way too much, and I'm not scary, so it didn't work. So I'm going to show you something. Um, this, can you guys see something that says teacher question number 1? Give me thumbs up. Okay. So this is start out, you ask what was happening. You ask them what was happening you take them outside, just you two, and you ask them what was happening. And they need to answer, you know, what was happening, what was going wrong, why did you take them out? A lot of times they won't, they'll say, I don't know. And then you can say, okay, but if you did know, what do you think it might have been? What would you guess? And they always know. So as long as they just say something, you just say thank you. You don't give them any kind of elaboration. Yes, you're right. And this is how I saw it. No, you just say thank you. And then the second question you can ask, how is that a problem for the class? Again, don't accept a non-answer and thank them for their response. How is that a problem for me as your teacher? They always know. It's never a problem that they don't know. And then the fourth question is, how is this going to be a problem for you if it doesn't stop? This is the best ever because they tell you their weak spot. They tell you if you don't want to talk to you, they'll be like, oh, you'll call my coach. Oh, you'll call my mom. Oh, you'll. They tell you what they're afraid of. Oh, you'll send me to the dean. They tell you what they're afraid of, unless they're really smart. And so this is, and then I tell them, yes, the next time there's going to be a consequence, and this is what it'll be. And this leaves out the whole emotional part of it because, and I didn't get this until 15 years into teaching, so I'm giving it to you now, and I can share it with Robert later.
Great, thank you. Okay.
Anybody else want the little faces? I can send it to you guys.
I
You
will
just have to
I will
translate it to your
send
language.
Diana an email, and if you send it to me, then I will share it with Sherry and my class. So we'll take care of it, not have you emailing an awful lot of people. So Arian, do you have anything that you would care to add?
No, first up, these are some pretty awesome women. Good Lord, I love this. I think what I want to say is something actually that's maybe not necessarily news to any of you, but don't ever stop learning for yourselves, because I think if I was who I was on day 1, now in year 20, I would be so sad. I don't think I would love this job. And like this evening, I've gotten so many great ideas that I'm going to take back to my room and add. And I just think that's it. Just be open to what other people can help give you. And it's, I think, but even just what Jennifer just shared with us, be open to what your students can give you as well, because they'll help you know how to help them, and they'll help you know how to be better. And I'm going to tell you that you can learn from your mistakes, or you can learn from ours. And I will tell you, I ruined one relationship with a student once, and I will never forget that. I will never forget how that made me feel. I cannot imagine how it made him feel. And I will regret that for the rest of my career. So.
Don't give up. This is really hard right now. I have cried at least once a week right now because this is so different from the way I'm used to teaching. But don't give up. This week, my students finally unmuted themselves to talk because the Lakers won. And then we were doing picture talk, and I had a woman crying, and this kid said she's crying because she's a Miami Heat fan. And I'm like, this is gold. And we just went with it, and we have a whole class story because of it. But I was really ready to just like, this is not working. I'm just spending so many hours planning lessons, and they're not engaging. And then it's slowly starting to happen. So don't give up. And then they are listening, they are paying attention, but they also have noise at home. They have little kids, little siblings to take care of. Some of them are homeless, who knows? So don't give up. And yes, this is hard work, I'm not gonna lie. I'm working all the time.
Okay, well, I want to thank the four of you for coming. You have done an amazing job tonight. There's so much there that I have learned, as well as my students and the student teachers. So we just want to thank you. I will officially end the time and stop the recording. I will keep the room open for a while, but we are done. And if anybody wants to leave, please feel free to do so.